Okay, good day everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the lecture series in 21st century literature from the Philippines and the world. And our first episode topic is all about the geographic, linguistic, and ethnic dimensions of Philippine literary history. Okay, so before we proceed with our discussion of the main topic, it's very important first for us to discuss what's the meaning, what's the definition of literature. Okay, what is literature? Literature derives from the Latin term litera, which means letter. So that's why in Tagalog, letter is titik. So titik, from that, we derive panitik, panitikan. So that's why when we say Philippine literature, we say panitikan ng Pilipinas or panitikan Pilipina. Okay, so in its real sense, what's the meaning of literature? Okay, according to Webster, literature is anything that is printed as long as it is related to the ideas and feelings of the people, whether it's true or just a product of one's imagination. Okay, so from the definition of Webster, it says that literature should be printed. It is printed as long as it's related to the ideas and feelings of the people. So we are talking here, class, any written work that tackles about man's experiences or man's ideas and feelings. So whether it is based on true story, it's based on facts, or it is just a product of one's imagination. Okay, let's have another one from Brother Azurin. According to Brother Azurin, literature expresses the feelings of people to society, to the government, to his surroundings, to his fellow men, and to his divine creator. Okay, if we are going to compare the definition from Webster and from Brother Azurin, the two common thing class or the two common things are both of them tackles that literature is related or it tackles all about the feelings of the people, the ideas or experiences of the people. Example, if I'm going to write a story about my experience or experiences during my childhood, so it is considered as literature. Or, for example, if I'm going to write a poem, if I'm going to express my experiences in the past or during my childhood days in the form of poetry, it is literature. Why? First, it is printed, it is written, then it tackles about man's feeling or man's experiences. So anything that is written, as long as it is related or tackles about man's feeling or experiences, it is considered literature. Okay, so literature or literary works are different from technical works. They are two different things. So in technical works, technical literature, they do not tackle about man's feeling or experiences. It tackles more on science and technology and business. While in literature, it tackles more on man's feeling and experiences. That is your keyword. Okay, so, but our main focus here is the literary history of the Philippines. The literary history of the Philippines, how it evolves from pre-colonial period up to contemporary period or to our present time. Okay, let's see. Okay, during the pre-colonial period, when we say pre-colonial period, it is the time, or it was the time, or it was the period that the Philippines was not yet colonized by any other foreign country. So remember, the first colony of the Philippines, or the first colonizer of the Philippines, was the Spaniards. So it means that when we say the pre-colonial period, it was the time that the Philippines was not yet colonized by other foreign countries. It was colonized by Spain. Okay, so what are the characteristics of our literature during this period? Okay, it says that during this time or during this period, literature reflected in our forefathers' customs and traditions. So, our literary works, we have our literature during this time, but most of the themes of literary works during this time tackles more on the customs and traditions of our forefathers or our ancestors. It was characterized mainly by oral tradition, and self-expression. What is oral tradition? So, when you say oral tradition, from the word oral, so most of the literary works during this time are based on the sayings, based on the proverbs, based on the riddles, or any oral forms of literature based on the ideas of our forefathers or elders of the community. Okay, that's why it says that its sources were usually the native town folks or the elders of the community. So, in some other words, it's like uh, pasalin-salin, kasabihan, nasalin, nasabi nitong nakatatanda sa community, it was transferred to others. So that's why it's called oral tradition. Okay, there were also written form of literature during this time, but they were considered as perishable. When we say perishable, they uh, they disappeared. They disappeared instantly. For what reason? Because it was written in a perishable materials like dried leaves. So our forefathers or ancestors during this time, they wrote their ideas, their feelings in the dried leaves, bamboo cylinder, and bark of the trees, and some other natural materials. So, of course, if this dried leaves has already, if this dried leaves or bamboo cylinder or bark of the trees has already broken or they were lost, so that particular literary works that we have written, that our forefathers have written in these materials, will also disappear. Okay, will also disappear. Okay, another characteristics of our literature during the pre-colonial period. During that time, they said that we have our alphabet, and our alphabet is Alibata. So before the Spaniards came to the Philippines, before we colonized by the Spaniards, we have already our alphabet. So in short, we have we had already our literature. Now, but when the Spaniards came to the Philippines, our alphabet was replaced by the Roman alphabet. So, and that Roman alphabet, up to now, it is the source of our current alphabet. Okay, so what are the literary forms during the pre-colonial period? Okay, we have three. We have oral literatures, we have folk songs, and we have folk tales. Okay, let's discuss them one by one. Okay, I said oral literatures are in the form of riddles, in the form of proverbs or sayings. So when we say riddles in Tagalog, they are called as mga bugtong. So riddles are statements that contain superficial words, but they function figuratively and are in the form of questions. It's like a puzzle. So it is in the form of question. It requires an answer. So our forefathers used this as a tool or as an instrument in order to sharpen their minds or our minds. So once you answered their riddles, it's like uh, you are a very smart person because you did answer their riddles, their puzzle. So example, baboy sa lansang, ang tunok puro lansang. In English, a wild pig of the forest is covered with spikes. Answer, nangka or jackfruit. So look, a wild pig of the forest is covered with spikes. So riddles is not only used for to sharpen their minds or our minds, but if you are going to analyze, it has also a meaning. It has also a philosophical meaning. So a wild pig of the forest is covered with spikes. If you will see the jackfruit, it looks like what? It looks like a it looks like a not a wild pig, but there are so many spikes. So that's why that is literal. But if you're going to analyze it, it has another meaning. So in short, our forefathers during this time, they are using these statements in order for them to relate, in order for them to share what they have or what ideas that they have or what experiences or feelings that they have in the form of riddles. Okay, next is Proverbs. What is Proverbs? Proverbs in Tagalog, mga salawikain. Salawikain. These are statements that are considered as wise and usually given by parents or elders of the community. So that's why they said that during the time they had full respect to the elders of the community. They consider them as wise men because they have what? They have so many experiences and whatever words that come from their mouth are considered as wise statements. Okay, example of Proverbs. This is from Ilocano. Di agutak, isut ng itlog. In English, he who cackles laid the egg. In Tagalog, I have had already heard this proverb, and they said that kung sino ang unang pumuta, siya ang may sala. So sometimes proverb we use it as our guide in our everyday activity. For example, at present, there are so many proverbs, especially in the remote areas in our country, that up to now, some of our forefathers, some of our countrymen are still applying. For example, when you go to the provinces, they have this salmikain. Ang hindi lumingon sa pinanggalingan ay hindi makakarating sa paroroonan. It's a very nice proverb. So if you will analyze, it will help. It will help you to grow. It will guide you in whatever endeavor that you are planning to do. So it's like a guiding principle of our forefathers during that time. Okay, so next is the folk songs. So during the pre-colonial period, our forefathers or ancestors, they have their folk songs. In Tagalog, folk songs is mga awiting bayan. So they have folk songs that are sung to put babies to sleep, and they call it lullabies or hele. Okay, they have also drinking songs, and they call it tagay. Maybe the word tagay was derived from this, that up to now, most of our countrymen are still using every time they are gathering and they have drinking session. Okay, then next, they have also love songs, and they call it harana. Harana, these are used by young men to capture the heart of the women that they love during that time, di ba? As your parents, your grandfathers and grandmothers they did apply this during their time, but now we are not applying. We are not applying this. We do not have harana. They have also religious songs. These are songs or chants that are usually given during exorcism and thanksgiving during good harvest. Um, in the remote areas, especially in the mountainous part of our country, for example, in Cordillera autonomous regions, our brothers there who belong to the ethnic groups, they still applying this. They offer religious songs to thank for their good harvest, to thank for their good harvest or for the abundance that they have received. Okay, so next, they have also songs of death. These are lamentations that contain the role of good deeds that the dead has usually done to immortalize his or her good image. So some of these are still being applied in some other parts of the country, but to those civilized or those highly urban places, like for example in Metro Manila and nearby provinces, normally we do not apply or we do not have these some folk songs. Okay, next literary form during pre-colonial period are folk tales. What are folk tales? I think folk tales are mga kwentong bayan. These are stories of native Filipinos that tackle the power of nature and the deity. This also tackle about irresponsibility, stupidity, and deception that eventually lead to the instilling of good morals. So sometimes some of the folk tales tackle about irresponsibility, stupidity, deception, or negativity, but still, at the end, the main purpose of this is to instill, to impart good morals or moral lesson. Okay, so we have myths. Myths, these are stories that tackle the natural occurrences of the earth and how things were created. So when we say myths, it's all about the creation of the world. So if the story tackles about, for example, the sun and the moon, the story of Bathala. By the way, Bathala was considered as their god during the time. The term they use to refer to God during the time. Okay, Tungkong Langit at Alunsina. So all of these are the story about creation. So they are myths. Next is legends. When you say legends in Tagalog, alamat or mga alamat, and you are familiar with this. These are stories that usually tell about the origins of something, some places, etc., or about supernatural occurrences and out of this world native imaginations. So, if you are familiar with the legend of Mariang Makiling or the ang alamat ng Mariang Makiling or Bundok Bakiling, ang alamat ng Daragang Magayon or the legend of Daragang Magayon, the derivation of the name of Mayon volcano is all about the legend of Daragang Magayon, the legend of Tagalog, the legend of Pasig River. There are so many legends. We are very rich in folktales. Okay. Next is fables. What is fables? Excuse me. Fables, these are brief stories that use animals as characters that represent a particular value or characteristics. Okay, especially children. So they are very fond of fables. The story of ang kuneho at ang pagong, ang ibon at ang langgam, or the most familiar, the story of ang pagong at ang matching. Remember the story of ang pagong at ang matching na nakakita sila ng puno ng saging sa may tabing ilog. Then They divided this uh, banana tree. Then yung pagong, he chose the matching. He chose the upper part, while the pagong or the turtle chose the lower part. So to make this story short, ang lumaki, tumubo at nagbunga ay dun sa pagong. So still, naisahan pa rin ng matching yung pagong at siya ang nakakuha ng bunga kasi hindi kaya ng pagong umakit sa punong saging. So what I want to point out is, even though we use in fables, we use we use animals as characters. Still, the main purpose of this is to impart or to instill value or good moral lessons. Okay, next is epics. What is epics? Epics, these are very lengthy narratives. It's a very long narrative, long story that based on oral traditions which revolve around supernatural events or heroic deeds of the main character. Okay, the most popular epic, Philippine epic, is the Ilocano epic entitled Biyag ni Lamang. Biyag ni Lamang. Lamang is the name of the main character. He is a very what you call this, extraordinary supernatural power, but he used it in a good he used this supernatural power in a good way. So he has heroic deeds. So another is Indarapatra at Sulaiman. So those are the literary forms during this period, the pre-colonial period. Okay, so from pre-colonial period, let's go to the Spanish period. So during this period, the Spaniards came to the Philippines. So in short, the Philippine literature or our literature was greatly affected. So it was influenced by the culture, it was influenced by the language of the Spaniards. Okay, so these are the characteristics of the these are the characteristics of the Philippine literature during this period. Okay, literature in this period may be classified as religious and secular in nature. Why? Because literature revolved mainly on the themes of Spanish culture and Roman Catholic religion. Why? Because the main contribution of the Spaniards to our country is the Christianism. They introduced Roman Catholic religion. So for almost 333 years, I think, that the Spaniards stayed in our country. Of course, they influenced us. They influenced our forefathers during the time. That's why most of the Filipino words are borrowed from Spanish language. For example, mesa, silla, ventana, aparador, etc. All of these are Spanish words. So, but we are using this in Filipino. We borrowed this. So they were. So that was considered as one of the influences of the Spaniards. Okay, how about in literature? They said that again, literature in this period may be classified as religious. Why religious? Because of the introduction, because of the spread of Christianity during the time and the introduction of Roman Catholic religion. And for almost 333 years of the Spaniards staying in the Philippines, of course, their culture, Spanish culture, was the main source of everything that our forefathers during that time were doing. So hindi may kakailan na na-influensyahan tayo ng kanilang kultura. Kaya our literature during this period are most of the literary works are related either to religious or secular form of literature. Okay, the teaching of the Christian doctrine became the basis of religious practices. Kaya nawala na yung mga bathala, nawala na yung mga paniniwala ng mga ninuno natin sa mga iba't ibang mga anito or whatever gods and goddesses during the time, because the Spaniards introduced the so-called Roman Catholic religion, or they spread the Christianity. Theatrical plays like comedia or comedy, cenaculo, and zarzuela were also introduced. Later, we will discuss what are those theatrical plays. The literary works during this time depicted the resistance of the Filipinos to the Spanish rule. Okay, it happened, these literary works happened during the time of, or the period of revolution and the propaganda movement. Okay, so there were four considered literary forms during this time. Those literary works that are considered as religious in nature or religious literatures. Then those literary works that are considered secular in nature or secular literatures. Those literatures that are considered as propaganda in nature. These are the works of propagandists. And those literatures that are considered revolutionary in nature. These are the works or the products of our Filipino revolutionists. Okay, let's discuss them one by one. Okay, so religious literatures, it revolves around the life and the death of Jesus Christ. As what I said a while ago, literature or Philippine literature mostly tackle about religions. It is because of the influence of the Spaniards when they introduced Roman Catholic religion and the spread of Christianity. So that's why most of the works, literary works during this time, are based on religion. So Doctrina Christiana, it was considered as the first book ever printed in the Philippines in 1593. It depicts Christianism. We have also Passion. Passion, remember Passion during Holy Week. So Passion, it depicts the passion and the death of Jesus Christ. Diba yung mga binabasa, may pabasa. So if you are going to read this, it is written, so it contains what? It depicts the passion and death of Jesus Christ. Cenaculo. Cenaculo, it is the reenactment of the passion. Reenactment of the passion, because cenaculo is in the form of play. It is a play. Up to now, in some parts of the country, they are still practicing cenaculo. Ito yung pang nakakakita sa during Holy Week, yung nagbubuhat ng cross, ng krus, at inire-reenact yung paghihirap ni Jesus Christ. So yan yung cenaculo. Okay, may gaganap na Jesus Christ, then nagbubuhat ng krus, may gaganap na Hudyo, nagpaparos sa kanya. Ayan yung cenaculo. How about commedia? Commedia or comedy, it usually relates the battle between the Christians and the Moros. In some other parts of the countries, I remembered when I was a child, or elementary, when I was elementary grade level, I did watch commedia. So it's part of our tradition. During fiesta, they had this commedia. So it is a battle. It's a battle between Christians and our Muslim brothers, yung mga Moros. So they have their conflict, or the Christians and the Moros. They have conflict up to now. They have conflict. So when you're going to watch commedia, it tackles it tackles the battle between the Christians and the Moros. So during this time, these are the most popular literary works during this time, and it's religious and they are religious in nature. Okay, how about secular literature? Secular literatures, it revolves around tales and valiance. It, it revolves around tales of valiance and adventure. Example of this in awit, corrido, or prose narrative. Okay, what is awit? Awit, it tells the tales of chivalry where a knight saves a princess. Best example of awit is Florante at Laura by Francisco Balagtas. So, it is in a narrative poem. A narrative poem, what is a narrative poem? A poem that tells story. That's a narrative poem. Now, awit is dodecasyllabic syllables. In short, when you are going to read, this the story narrative, and narrative poetry, it is a story in the form of poetry. So for every line, for every stanza, you are going to what? For every stanza, for example, for every stanza there are 4 lines, and each line there are 12 syllables. Yun yung dodecasyllabic syllable, yan yung awit. Yung corrido, it is also a narrative poetry, a poem that tells story. It is a metrical tale that follows the structure of a poem. Look, best example of this is ang Ibong Adarna. So, the difference between awit and corrido, it is octasyllabic, or there are 8 syllables in each line. So, for example, best example of this is ang Ibong Adarna. So, for example, there are 4 lines in one stanza, and each line is composed of 8 syllables. So, example, may isang ibong maganda. Look, may isang ibong maganda. 8. Ang pangalan ay Adarna. 8. Second line. Pag narinig mong kumanta, look, another 8. Third line, fourth line. Ang buhay mo'y giginhawa. Look, so that is what we call corrido. So, ang Ibong Adarna is best example of corrido, and Florante at Laura is the best example of awit. Okay. They had also the so-called prose narratives. Prose narratives, when we say prose, it is the opposite of poetry. Prose means not in the form of poetry, not in the form of poem. It is a literary work that teaches Filipinos in proper decorum. Best example of this is Urbana at Felisa. Urbana at Felisa, I think I remembered when I was in college, the complete title of this, ang pagsulatan ng magkapatid na sina Urbana at Felisa, something like that. But because the title is very long, they shortened it to Urbana at Felisa. But still, it's an example of prose narratives. Okay, so let's move on. Let's move on with the so-called propaganda literatures. Why they are called propaganda literatures? From the word propaganda. So, during this time, they also consider this period as period of enlightenment during propaganda period or propaganda movement. Propaganda movement is a movement that was formed by the middle class intellects who studied abroad. Like for example, Jose Rizal, Graciano Lopez Haina, Marcelo Derpilar, Mariano Ponce, etc. So, sila yung mga nasa middle class kung tawagin ng mga ilustrados. na may kakayahang makapag-aral sa ibang bansa, especially in Europe during the time. So, the purpose of propaganda movement in our Philippine history is to what? In order for them to show their resistance against the Spanish rule. What they did is they formed this movement to enlighten our what? Our countrymen, our forefathers during this time, that this Spanish rule should be stopped. This abuse, or the abuse of the Spanish rule should be stopped. But how can they fight during the time? How can they fight in the form of swords, in the form of weapons or any weapons? The only weapons that they had is in the form of pen, panulat. So, ginawa nila, they formed this movement and they established different literary words. So, their resistance to the Spanish rules, Spanish government, the praeles, to the church, were written in the different literary words. So, the literary words during this time, or literary forms during this time, were in the form of satires, editorials in the newspapers, news articles, and novels that aim to attack the Spanish rule. So, that aim to resist the Spanish rule. Okay, so the three well-known pillars of the propaganda movement was Jose Rizal, Marcellus del Pilar, and Graciano Lopez Haina. Now, the propaganda movement during that time, they had also newspaper. So, in their newspaper, they wrote different articles, they wrote different editorials, they wrote different columns in the form of satires that attacked, that tackled the wrongdoings or the abuse in power of the Spaniards. Okay, these are best examples, or these are examples of literary works that they had written during this time. Ang Fray Botod. Ang Fray Botod was written by Graciano Lopez Haina. So it is a literary work that exposed how some of the friars during the time was the Spanish priest. How some of the friars were greedy, ambitious, and immoral. Next is Iingat Kayo and Dasalan at Tuksohan by Marcellus del Pilar. These are humorous and sarcastic literary works done against the Spanish priest. So, Dasalan at Tuksohan, it is more on a satirical work written by Marcellus del Pilar that depict the wrongdoings, the greediness of the Spanish friars, yung mga fraile during that time. Okay, and you are familiar with the work of Jose Rizal, Noli Me Tangere. So, Noli Me Tangere was written by Jose Rizal when he was still part of the propaganda movement. So, it is the novel that exposed the evils in the Spanish-run government in the Philippines. It also gave spirit to the propaganda movement and paved the way to the revolution against Spain. Okay, so from propaganda literature, let's move on to revolutionary literature. Sabi nga sa last part, di ba? The work of Jose Rizal, Noli Me Tangere, gave spirit to the propaganda movement and paved the way to the revolution against Spain. That's where the next form of literatures are called as revolutionary literature, because these are the products of our forefathers and ancestors who belong to this revolutionary group. Okay, these are literary works, mostly essays and novels. During revolutionary period, most of the literary works are in the form of essays and novels that sparked revolution and resistance in the heart of the Filipinos. Remember Andres Bonifacio? Andres Bonifacio uh, is or Andres Bonifacio was the founder of Katipunan, and Katipunan was one of the secret society during the time that staged revolt against Spaniards. Okay, these are the works or literary works during this time. Look, ang dapat mabatid ng mga Tagalog kay Andres Bonifacio. Look, they said that Andres Bonifacio did not have good education, di katulad ng Rizal, hindi siya ilustrado, galing sa mahirap ng pamilya, but still, he did right. So, ang kanyang essay is entitled, Ang Dapat Mabatid ng Mga Tagalog. It is an essay outlining the basic tenets of Bonifacio's ideas on nationalism. Okay. Next is Liwanag at Dilim by Emilio Jacinto. Remember Emilio Jacinto? Emilio Jacinto is the brain of Katipunan. So, he wrote Liwanag at Dilim. He was the right hand of Andres Bonifacio. So, he wrote Liwanag at Dilim. It is a collection of essays on different subjects like freedom, work, faith, government, and love of country. So you will notice that the themes of literary works during from propaganda movement up to revolutionary period tackled more on freedom, government, faith, and love of country, nationalism. Kasi nga gusto natin makalaya sa mga sa kamay ng mga Spaniards during that time. Okay. Next is El Desarrollo y Caída de la República Filipina. The title is in Spanish language, like No Le Tangere, written by Apolinario Mabini. Apolinario Mabini, remember, he was a sublime paralytic and the right hand of Emilio Aguinaldo. He was the brain of the revolution. If Emilio Jacinto was considered as the brain of Katipunan, Apolinario Mabini was the brain of revolution. Okay, he wrote this essay entitled El Desarrollo y Caída de la República Filipina, an essay that highlights the establishment of the Philippine Republic and the subsequent doom due to disunity among the Filipinos. Okay, then the sequel of the novel of Jose Rizal was written during revolutionary period, and he was entitled as El Filibusterismo. Remember, during your high school days, you have No Le Tangere and El Filibusterismo. So it is a sequel to the No Le Tangere that exposed the evils in the government and in the church. Okay, so those were the literary forms and literary background of literature and some literary works during the Spanish period. So let's move on. This time, after the Spaniards, the American came. The American came not to or the American came to colonize also. So this time, Philippine literature was greatly affected also. So the work of our countrymen, the work of our heroes, the work of our forefathers and ancestors during the Spanish period were affected during the American period. Why? Look, because during the American period, since American, their language is English, so there was a shift with the medium of instruction, with the medium of communication, from Tagalog to Spanish, Tagalog to English, Spanish to English. So of course, uh, this was the period of the American. They will what? They will implement to use English as a medium of instruction in all aspects of our life, from education to government to literature. They will implement that. So this period was divided into three. First, period of reorientation. Why it was called as period of reorientation? During this time, uh, the Filipino writers need to be reoriented. They need to be reoriented using English as a medium, because during this time, English became the medium of instruction in the public schools. Writers of this period were adjusting the standards of the English literary style, as what I said. Of course, this was the period of American. Of course, they will implement to use English as a medium when those Filipino writers want to write something, want to write or to express themselves in the form of writing. Okay, so if it's your first time to use this language, you need to be reoriented, or you need to be reoriented with this language. So that's why period of reorientation. So next is period of imitation. What is this period of imitation? Why it was called as period of imitation? During this time, Filipino writers in English, who were pioneers in short story writing, were searching their way into imitating their foreign models. So short story became one of the literary forms that were being written by Filipino writers. But since they are not or they were not expert in using English as a medium, they are not expert in the style of the English literary verse. So what normally they did during this time is they imitate, they search their way into imitating their foreign models. Okay, then on the last period, under the American period of self-discovery. Okay, this time, Philippine writers are now familiar. Philippine writers were now familiar. Philippine writers were considered expert in using English and expressing themselves in the form of writing. So when they write, for example, short story, they are now they did not imitate any other foreign models. They can write. They can write their own short story. They can write their own literary work using English as a medium, because they are now familiar with this language. So, period of self-discovery, Filipino writers by this time had acquired the mastery of English writing. Okay, so they want into all forms. They want into all forms of writings using English as a medium. Okay, these are literary works written by Filipinos in English during the American period. So, in the period of reorientation, poetry is the literary form that was written, or that was used by the Filipino writers, because for them it's very easy to write a poem using English as a medium during this time, because this was the period of reorientation. So the representative literary work in poetry during this time is Air Castles by Juan F. Salazar. Look, from the title itself, it is written in English. Okay, from period of orientation to period of imitation, still poetry became the popular literary form that our forefathers, that the Filipino writers were using or were doing. So the representative literary work during the period of imitation is the poem entitled The Sea by Natividad Marquez. And for the period of self-discovery, they have also this representative poems entitled 1896 by Aurelio Alvero, to a Lost One by Angela Manalang Gloria, and Prayer of a Student by Trinidad L. Tarosa Subido. So, even though the American, or even though the Americans implemented the use of English language as a medium, of course, the Filipinos are expert in using Tagalog as a medium. So, even though this was the period or the American period, still there are some Philippine writers who did write literary works using Tagalog. Okay, and these are literary. I'm very sorry. These are short story because during the self-discovery, remember, during the self-discovery, it's not only poetry, but Philippine writers did write short story because they had the mastery of the English language as a medium. And the representative literary works or short story during this time, we have Dead Stars by Paz Marquez Benitez, The Making of a Writer by Salvador P. Lopez, and Shadow and Solitude by Clara M. Recto, and translated by Nick Joaquin. Okay, so as what I said a while ago, not only literary works that were written in English during the time itself, there were literary works written in Tagalog by by the Philippine writers. But those literary works that were written in Tagalog were being suppressed. They were being stopped by the American because the Americans wanted the Filipinos at the time, the Philippine writers, to use English language. Okay, so these are the literary works written in Tagalog by the Philippine writers. The representative literary works in poetry, Magintong Dahon and Sa Dakong Silangan by Jose Corazon de Jesus. In the form of drama or play, we have Walang Sugat by Severino Reyes, Kahapon, Ngayon at Bukas by Aurelio Tolentino, and Tanikalang Ginto by Juan Abad. I remember during my Panatikang Filipino subject in my college days, my professor said that these three dramas written by Severino Reyes, Aurelio Tolentino, and Juan Abad, they were being suppressed by the Americans because they tackled the abuse also of the American government during that time. Okay, they had also novel, Madaling Araw by Inigo Ed Regalado, Lalaking Uliran o Tulisan by Juan Lauro Arciwals, and Fulgencia Galvillo, Capitan Bencio Alfaro by Gabriel B. Francisco. Okay, so from American, the Japanese came. So the third colonizer. So the Philippine literature or our literature was greatly affected again by another colonizer. Look, during the Japanese period, Philippine literature was interrupted in its development during the Japanese period. Okay na sana namamaster na nga ng mga Filipino writers ang paggamit ng English language, but the Japanese invaded our country. So Philippine literature was interrupted in its development during the Japanese period. Philippine literature in English came into a halt. So the Japanese stopped all literary works that were written by Filipino writers who used English as a medium. The use of English language was forbidden. Kasi kaaway ng mga Japanese ang American during that time. Sila nang pumasok, so pinapalis ang mga Amerikano. So lahat ng mga influence ng Amerikano ay of course ng mga Japanese. So that's why the use of English language was forbidden. The field of the short story was recognized so during the Japanese period. But many of the plays were reproductions of English plays into Tagalog. So parang mas gusto pa nila na mga literary works that were written by the Philippine writers during the Japanese period were written in Tagalog than in English. And the common theme of most of poems was nationalism, country, love, and life in the provinces because sawang-sawa na ang mga Filipinos. Gusto nila ng kalayaan. Gusto nilang makapagsarili. So from Spain, Spaniards, American, then now the Japanese, and other colonizers. So still, we were not free during that time. Okay, what are the representatives literary works during the Japanese period? So, in terms of poetry, To My Native Land by Trinidad Altarosa Subido. In essay, Shall We Walk by Paul Santillan Castrense. Short story, My Father's Tragedy by Carlos Bulusan. Play, Panday Pira by Jose Maria Hernandez. Sa Pula sa Puti by Francisco Soc Rodriguez. Ganti ng Patay by Julian Cruz Balmaceda. And I Saw the Fall of the Philippines by Carlos P. Romulo. It is a memoir. Okay, so you will notice that even though the English language was forbidden during that time, still there were some Filipinos who used English as a medium in their literary works. Sabi ko nga, kung kailan pa na mga master nila, saka na maipapahinto ang paggamit niyan, di ba? So, but still, there were literary works that were written in Filipino or Tagalog. Okay, so from Japanese, ayan, the post-colonial period. The post-colonial period, from pre-colonial to post-colonial. So, it's pre-colonial before the colonization of the Philippines, post-colonial after the colonization of our country. So the post-colonial period, it means that this was the end. This was the end of the colonization to our country. Colonization of our country. So this period started during the rebirth of freedom in 1946 to present. So in 1946, July 4, 1946, the Philippines regained its freedom and the Filipino flag waved joyously alone. So, July 4, 1946, in our Philippine history, was the date when the American granted us full independence. Yan na yung tapos ng Commonwealth. So, that's why it was called as Philippine Republic because we are totally free with the granting of the Philippine independence on July 4, 1946. So it is different from July 12, 1896, when Emilio Aguinaldo declared independence. But we are celebrating June 12 as our Independence Day because that was the first time that the Filipino declared independence. But after the declaration of Philippine independence, the American colonized us, then Japanese invaded us. So that's why on July 4, 1946, it was considered the time that we are fully independent from the other countries, from the colonizers. Okay. So what are those periods belong to this post-colonial period. What are the characteristics of Philippine literature during this period? Okay, let's see. Okay, so let's start with the rebirth of freedom. So when I say rebirth of freedom, the freedom was born again. The early post-liberation period was marked by a kind of struggle of mind and spirit posed by the sudden emancipation from the enemy and the wild desire to see print. Literary writing in vernacular became popular during this period, and the writers had a better knowledge of their craft and enjoyed political activism. Since uh, we were freed already during this period, and the Filipino writers start to what? Started to enjoy political activism, started to enjoy to improve their craft. But still, sabi nga dyan, it is marked by a kind of struggle of mind and spirit. Kasi, rebirth of freedom, katatapos lang ng mga nightmare natin from the colonizers. So, hindi mawawala kaagad sa isipan natin from our mind and spirit what we had experienced from them. Okay, what are the representatives? What are the representative literary works during this time? In poetry, we have "When I See a Barong-Barong" by Maximo Ramos. In short story, we had "Plighted Word" by Narciso G. Reyes. Then, "Scent of Apples" by Bienvenido Santos. "Cadaver" by Alberto S. Florentino. "They Call It Brotherhood" by Maximo P. Sullivan. And "Kwento ni Mabuti" by Genevieve Edros. So, those are the representative literary works during this period, during the birth of freedom, and they were considered as the well-known writers during this period. Maximo Ramos, Narciso G. Reyes, Bienvenido Santos, Alberto S. Florentino, Maximo V. Sullivan, and Genevieve Edrosa. There were some other writers, I think, but what I have included are those only that were considered familiar during that time. Okay, from Roberto Freedom, here comes the so-called period of activism. Ayan. According to Ponciano Pineda, youth activism in 1970 to 1972 was due to domestic and worldwide causes. Because of the ills of the society, the youth moved to seek reforms. The youth became vocal with their sentiments. They demanded a change in the government. It was not only manifested in the bloody demonstrations on the sidewalk expression, but also in literature. In the expression of this desire for change, the writings of some youth who were fueled with nationalism in order to emphasize the importance of their petitions. So, period of activism was happened during the period of 1970 to 1972, and it was the time of martial law when former President Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law. There was so-called suppression of the press. So there were so many demonstrations. There were so many grievances against the government. Most of the youths went to street to demonstrate, to express themselves. But not only that, but also in their form of writing. So it likes during the time of propaganda movement and revolutionary period under the Spanish era or Spanish period. Remember, the Philippine writers during those times were their works or the literary works that they had written during that time resisted, or they had full of resistance against the Spanish government. So during the period of activism, the Filipino writers, not only the writers in not only the Filipino writers but also Filipino broadcasters and newscasters, reporters, or in media, in television, in radio, even in film, most of their works tackled about the suppression of the press, the the abuse in power of the dictatorial form of government of former Ferdinand E. Marcos. Okay, so most of the works during this time were not published, like because most of the publishing companies were being closed. Some of the radio stations and TV stations were being sequestered by the government during this time. That's why uh, there were uh, there were no literary works that were published maybe during this time because of the situation. Because of the situation wherein the power of the government, the dictatorial power of the government has been so very has been implemented strictly against those demonstrators, against those people who express themselves in the form of writing. Okay, but the representative literary works during this time in the form of short story, the so-called Valediction sa Hillcrest by Rolando Tino and Burger Children by Emmanuel Torres. Okay, so after period of activism, here comes the period of new society. Okay, so it means that the martial law was being lifted. The period of the new society started on September 21, 1972. The Carlos Palanca Awards, awarding body for those literary works that excelled in any form, continued to give annual awards. Poems dealt with patience, regard for native culture, customs, and the beauties of nature and surroundings. Newspapers donned new forms. News on economic progress, discipline, culture, tourism, and the like were favored more than the sensationalized reporting of killings, rape, and robberies. So there was a sudden change of the themes when it comes to forms of writing during this period. Sabi nga dyan, news on economic progress, discipline, culture, tourism, and the like were favored than reporting sensationalized killings, rape, and robberies. Filipinos before were hooked in reading magazines and comics now. Comics during this time started to prosper. And the representative literary works during this period were Philosopher's Love Song by Tita Lacambra Ayala, The Tomato Game by N.V.M. Gonzalez, and I Married a Newspaper Man by Maria Luna Lopez. All of these are poems or poetry. Okay, after a period of new society, the return of democracy, the period wherein we regain democracy. Once more, the Filipino people regained their independence after the peaceful power revolution, which they lost 20 years ago. 20 years ago referred to the time when President Ferdinand Marcos ruled the country. In the short span of the existence of the new society, several changes already became evident. Yes, that's correct, because as what I discussed a while ago. Uh, News themes about economic progress, tourism, or good things were favored than the sensationalized news of killings, rapes, and robberies. So they were evident during the time. So up to now, uh, it was noticed in the new Filipino songs, newspapers, speeches, and even in the television programs. The now cloned newspapers that enjoyed an overnight increase in circulation were the Inquirer, Malaya, and the People Journal. Okay, so the return of democracy started when President Corazon Aquino was catapulted in power. When President Aquino assumed the presidency. So that was the end of the dictatorial form of government of former President Ferdinand Marcos. So the uh, the TV stations, the radio stations, the publishing company that were being closed and sequestered by the government were being opened. Then uh, they were being returned to the real owners, and the suppression of the press was gone. Then the freedom of the press, freedom of expressions was or were freely exercised by uh, by the members of the press and even the Philippine writers. So the representative literary works during this time are Death Like Stone for Benigno Aquino Jr. from Philippine Panorama, and the well-known speech of President Corazon Aquino before the U.S. Congress. Okay, so the Inquirer, Malaya, and the People's Journal became the newspapers uh, that that show support with the present government. So it's like most of the me, press people and the Philippine writers enjoyed when the return of democracy period came, because they they are now freely write what they want to write. They are now freely exercise. They are now freely express themselves by what they want to express. Okay, so after the return of democracy in 1986, up to now that we are now in the so-called 21st century, there is a gradual change. There is a gradual change of literary form with the advent of communication technology. There were so many literary forms that prospered. The new trends have been used and introduced to meet the need and taste of the new generation. 21st century learners are demanded to be ICT, information, communication technology inclined to compete with the style and format of writing as well. New codes or lingos are used to add flavor in the literary pieces produced nowadays. So, this is our subject, the 21st century literatures from the Philippines and the world. So, this is our focus. So, I will not discuss this in detail because this topic has a separate discussion in our next or future episode. Okay, so that's all, guys. That's all for our first episode, and see you soon in the next episode. Thank you. Bye bye.